Okay, we are live. Hello, everyone. For those who are joining in post and wanting to start from the beginning, it's good to see you. I am just right now going to be posting some links. Come join. Bam, bam. Send to now. There we go. And we're going to join. And add selecting video. Bam. Post. Okay. Hello, everyone. Good to see you all. We'll, as per usual, wait a little bit, let people filter on in. Hey there, Diego. Hey there, how you doing, Daniel? Okay, so we got various topics to go into today, but of course the top item on the menu is going to be talking with a legend of the modding scene, and that will be a little bit later. But in the meantime, there's a couple other things I want to discuss first in regards to things like modding and mechanical design, and obviously we have build of the month and similar. So there's going to be a number of other things to go through, but in the meanwhile, we're going to let people filter in, and if you guys have any like general questions or topics or things you want to briefly discuss before we get into the meat of today's stream, then please feel free to fire it away. How are you guys doing? How have you been? How did you like the recent total overhaul video? Oh, good to see you, Eric. It's great to have you back in chat again. Yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts while we're waiting the usual couple minutes to let people filter on in. Once again, if you missed when I said it a few moments ago, we're going to be obviously having a big interview with the creator of the Portuguese Civ mod, which I think will be exceptionally exciting and fun. But we also, of course, have Build of the Month. There's a couple of cool mod things I want to talk to you guys about, and I want to talk about mechanical design in games, because I've been thinking about it a lot recently for Total Overhaul, as well as for my own game, Enclave. And I feel like there's a couple of topics that could be useful to put to words, but don't feel coherent enough to merit their own video. Plus, I really have very little time to create videos, so I want to be as specific with it as I possibly can. Salwete to you as well, Megas. Where'd you get that shirt? This shirt was actually custom printed for an event that a game store ran for my game Enclave. They were hosting us for the day, and they made us some cool shirts, so I got this for free, which is pretty sick. Maybe I'll go into that a little more later. It was a great video. It adds so much texture to the game. Thank you so much. That's something that I'm really hoping to get into a lot more in Total Overhaul, and something I really believe in, which we're actually going to be talking about in the video today, or the stream today rather, which is invisible complexity, which I think is really important to go into. The changes for the forest were the most interesting thing for me. Yeah, I think that making forest permeable and a factor in stealth and defense is critical. Like, it's how they were used in real life, and so to not have them used that way is a bummer. Nice, you got your first merchandise. I actually have more merchandise than that. This was the first piece of merchandise someone ever made for me unasked. But I, for example, had these little buttons forever, actually. I've been printing those for multiple years, and I have others besides too. I'm getting pretty handy with them. I got mugs, I got mouse pads, laser engraved slate coasters, posters. Maybe I'll show them later if people want to see. But yeah, I'm getting serious with the whole merch thing. Haven't seen the last vid yet. Hasn't been decided on which era the overhaul should be. Yes, we are going to be focusing on From the Ashes, which ranges from 600 to 850 AD. That was the era that I first proposed as the one I was personally most interested in, but I was completely ready to do other ones if people desired, but it seemed as though people were pretty happy to go with the one that I suggested. So we're going to be doing that one, which is great. It's an era I love. I think it's wildly underrated. And to me, it best fulfills kind of the original promise of Age of Kings. You know, Rome has fallen, the world is up for the grabs. That, right? Hello, good to see you, fulgurating bean. How about units that can crush trees by moving into them? That seems like the sort of thing that would be probably best reserved for a game focused in the modern era, like tanks. Tanks should absolutely be able to do that, but it's a little beyond my scope. So we will see. Okay, I think we have enough people, and so before we dive in further, I want to do my typical shout out to my work, Enclave. If you have any interest in tabletop role-playing games, please do check out my game Enclave now on Kickstarter. I will post the link in the chat, and I will add it to the description of this stream after I post it. It is a diceless role-playing game. Before you go, oh my god, how can you have a diceless... Trust me, it works. It works really well. But I shan't go into detail because this is not a tabletop role-playing game channel. It is a real-time strategy and strategy game more broadly channel. And because of that, I'd like to talk a little bit about mechanics in strategy games and what I've been thinking about recently. Because you may have noticed I've posted a lot of polls recently about other games besides Age of Empires. I've posted things about Warcraft 3 and other historical RTSs and fantasy and licensed stuff. I've been interested in seeing what you guys are most interested in, because even though I myself am familiar with like less than a quarter of all of the games that I've been posting about here, I have looked into them and am trying to find cool ideas that I can steal for Total Overhaul. And I've been reading your comments as well to see what cool mechanics I can steal from you. So strategy game mechanics have been on the mind, but so too has been the idea of how far is too far, how much complexity is too much complexity, how much information is too much information, and how can we stop information overload to players picking up something for the first time. And in my eyes, there is only one type of mechanic that well and truly ruins games. I call it a day-ruining mechanic. And that, to me at least, I'm trying to find like a perfect way to define it, but is a mechanic that could have been easily avoided and is so cripplingly frustrating that it makes you not want to play the game. You know what I mean? Maybe you guys have a different definition for it, but I even have an example planned. That being this game, the Banner Saga. Now, Banner Saga is not a real-time strategy, right? But it's nice. My stupid face is cutting it off. But it's illustrative for what I'm going for here, because it is a strategy game. And for that matter, it's rather a beautiful strategy game. It's well presented. It has like actually some of the most authentic like Scandinavian aesthetics, like medieval Scandinavian aesthetics I've ever seen in a game. It's just staggeringly beautiful. And it's really fun. I really like it. I like a lot about the Banner Saga. Except for one mechanic. A mechanic that, even though I loved the game, was so annoying to me personally. I did not finish the series. I finished the first game, and I got partially through the second, and I could not bring myself to play it anymore because of one mechanic. And it all comes down... I found this... I was trying to find a way to not have to, like, read it aloud to you. So I found this chipper British fellow on YouTube who explains why this sucks. And he's in the context, by the way, is he's saying, oh, you should weaken enemies rather than killing them. Here's why. Let's listen to this chipper British fellow named Versus Evil. Thank you, Versus Evil. Comment like the dislike might not like you, but I like you because you helped me illustrate my point. Listen.
The advantage of maiming enemies instead of killing them is that when all their units are still alive, they'll have to cycle through all those useless wretches and spend their turns being pretty darn ineffective. If you kill those enemies instead, sure, they're dead, but the remaining enemy units now cycle much quicker, which means they're more agile. If you've got 5...
Why? Thank you, Versus Evil, for that illustration. Why would you do that? Why? It's atrociously frustrating. The fact that when you are winning a battle, the enemies fight faster, not even harder. They don't get like a stat buff. They just get to move more often. What the fuck? Why are my enemies turning into the Flash because their allies are dying? That makes zero goddamn sense. And before it's like, oh, well, they're fighting harder. Yeah, but that doesn't mean fucking flipping all over the place and getting to move like 5 times often in some cases as my guys. That is ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And not only does it absolutely screw immersion for me, not only is it tactically frustrating, not only does it mean that you have to play the game in this stupid, tedious manner where you're like whittling down enemies and making them all like individually limbed and then killing them all in one turn. Pfft, why? But on top of that, it goes directly opposite to intuition. You are not trying to kill your opponents as fast as possible. You're trying to weaken them and then wipe them out in one turn. And if you don't, they get better. They get literally better. It's so annoying. And there was such an easy way to solve this. The easy way to solve this is not to have that mechanic. And just say that every time there's a turn cycle, we alternate going through our guys, and whoever runs out of guys first, the other person just gets to move all their remaining guys. Easy. Easy. Super freaking easy. Such an easy fix. Now, I'm getting tilty about this. Not because Banner Saga sucks. This mechanic sucks. The game is amazing. And because of this mechanic, I was not able to enjoy it. And maybe I'm alone. Maybe everyone besides me in the world thinks that that is a sensible mechanic. You guys tell me in chat. Does that make sense? Does that make like intuitive sense to you? Why that should be the case? Because for me it was so bad, I didn't want to play the game anymore. And that to me is the type of mechanic that is a day ruiner. It breaks my immersion, it breaks my logic, it breaks my core assumptions about the way things work to such a massive degree, and is like just unfun. To such a massive degree, I don't want to play the game. As long as a mechanic doesn't do that, I think it's salvageable. The rest of it comes down to the presentation of information, which is why I like to talk about mechanics in terms of invisible complexity. A mechanic should ideally be able to impact the game in a way that doesn't force the player to understand it. Now, not all mechanics should be invisibly complex. Many of them should be front and center, of course. We want to know why when I click on a militia at the barracks, it trains the militia and depletes the food and gold from my stockpile, right? Obviously. So this isn't a matter of hiding everything from the player, though I do think there are some games in which that can work, and it's kind of fun. But for a strategy game, especially a real-time strategy game, no, you don't want to do that. But there is a balance to be struck between how much information you volunteer to the player and how much you let be behind the scenes and let them discover at their own pace. Or, in some cases, never explicitly say and just let people figure it out themselves. I tend to be in the category of you want to give the player the ability to learn about as much as possible, even if it means like they have to go way out of their way, because that means that if someone gets wildly enfranchised and wants to go into a ton of depth, they can. That's great. That's good. We want people to go into a ton of depth. But it's not the sort of thing we want to mandate, both because it's very casual unfriendly, and also because even for people who aren't casuals, it's annoying. It increases the barrier to entry and makes people less likely to become enfranchised in the first place. This is something I've been thinking about a lot with my game Enclave. Even though it is a diceless tabletop role-playing game, I still need to present information in a way that is thorough enough that people will be able to absorb it, but not so dense that people will be repelled by it. It's fine balance, and that balance is different in every genre of game. Before I go further, I'd love to hear your thoughts first on the Banner Saga rant I just had, but also invisible complexity and where you find the line to be. Do you see where I'm going for with invisible complexity? And I mean, I'll get into in a moment how this applies to Total Overhaul, but I think it's a really important topic, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on it before I dive in deeper. Okay. Taking through. Let's jump all the way back. Okay. Don't dare call them Byzantines. I think you shouldn't sleep on Total War games for your overhaul. The different format, but still much to get inspiration from. Yes, completely agree. There's a lot to like about Total War games. I played Warhammer 2 for quite a while, and I respect medieval and the original Rome in particular a lot. I agree. There's a lot of good things to be found there. Good to see you, Yavik. Hey, good to see you, Crossel. I'm glad you caught the stream. When there will be a video about the Perm civilization. Oh, that's way down the line. Maybe if there's enough interest in it from other people. Banner Saga. Hey, Honne, good to see you. A martyr mechanic. That'd be kind of cool. Have I played Darkest Dungeon? Yes. In fact, Darkest Dungeon is a game I wanted to talk about on the channel because it does a lot of things that normally I hate. And yet, for Darkest Dungeon in particular, I love it. Yeah, the Darkest Dungeon is a phenomenal game. Wasn't a fan of the second one as much because it's like kind of just Slay the Spire. But there's some things that I really like about it. But overall, Darkest Dungeon 1, that would be on my top 10 games of all time. And my wife and I playing together have clocked over 700 hours in it, which is rare for me. I don't normally like rabbit hole a game like that. I can go more into Darkest Dungeon if you guys want me to talk about it. Hey, Chase, good to see you, man. This kind of mechanic exists in some JRPGs. I'm sure it does. I'm sure Banner Saga wasn't the first to come up with this idea, but it sucks. In D&D, the order of battles doesn't change because someone falls. You still have to wait your turn. Yeah, exactly. I think that would make way more sense. And then, so yeah, it's not a good mechanic. Round-based fantasy story game. Yeah, I generally don't play Philadelphia scenarios because they're basically all RTS games. Or RPG rather, from AoE 2. I can see some people not liking that, but for me there was a lot to like about those back in the day. Currently making visual novel. That's pretty cool. In Unreal Engine, nicely done. Maybe you're welcome to post on the Discord server if you're looking for people to help you out with that. I'm not familiar with a particular game, but I do agree players should not find the hard way about essential mechanics and elements. Darkest Dungeon is good. Yeah, it's amazing. Played War Tales, and when you had more troops, you would always go against more enemies, which I wasn't a fan of. Yeah, that sounds kind of lame. Like, it's fun when you get an advantage for that sort of thing. Martyr mechanic was what Banner Saga was going for. I agree it's what it was going for, but I think there were many better ways to do it. I would have been totally fine with units getting a stat buff if they were like the last man standing. But moving more frequently, I don't know. That doesn't work for me. I think I would call it deep complexity or iceberg complexity. There should be a surface layer that is easy to understand, but as it interacts with the rest of the game, it becomes complex. Yes, I think that's a very good way of putting it. I like the term invisible complexity to some degree myself, but I'll get to why in a moment. And hello to you too. Darkest Dungeon works so good. Its mechanics are so punishing, it makes so much sense. Yes, exactly. AoE 2 has more RPG options now than ever. Maybe very janky, but an RPG campaign is very doable. Indeed, and I'm sure more and more people will do it over time. Yeah, so in regards to invisible complexity, if we move ever so swiftly onwards, something that I wanted to add about invisible complexity that I don't know how will land with you guys. One of my favorite games of all time that I rabbit-holed for quite some years and got into the pro scene a good bit was Super Smash Bros. Melee. I love the game. I love it profoundly. Which is funny, coming from me, who's like no micro in AoE 2. I'm not saying no micro, but like less micro in AoE 2, and yet I like a fighting game that has wild amounts of tech skill. The thing that's so cool about Melee, in particular, among Smash games, is it remains one of the most fun casual party games of all time, even in comparison to a lot of like the newer Smash games that are on their surface more casual friendly. Melee still holds up. And yet is also the best competitive Smash game of all time. And the only exception is the mod Project M, which makes Brawl more like Melee. It is amazingly done, even though it's, I think, like almost completely by accident. And so much of what makes Melee so good as a competitive game is its invisible complexity. There are so many details and statistics that the game doesn't show you. For example, what is the rate in which a character turns? What is their move speed? You don't know. Just play the game and find it out. Now, that's not the sort of approach I would apply to a strategy game, per se. You need more information in a strategy game than in a fighting game, because in a fighting game, it flows a lot more naturally. You have way less to think about. You're focusing on your guy doing his things, and so because of that, you can test way more easily and kind of get a feel for it. But I do still think that we can include these elements of invisible complexity in RTS games. An example that came from my last vid is things like turn rate and acceleration. Those are things I don't think should appear on the unit card. Or maybe they could have like a little tab that said like advanced statistics or something that you could click, you get to see all of them. Diablo 2 Resurrected added one of these, which is very good, by the way. I like that a lot. So maybe you can add it as like a sidebar that can be optionally popped open. But that doesn't mean that those invisible statistics should not exist, and it doesn't mean that they also should not be impactful. In fact, I really like the sidebar thing. Let's go with that. The player should be able to find out about it, but it should never be crammed into the face of a newcomer. Because as a newcomer, you want to be able to engage with the game in a way that feels kind of intuitively makes sensical to you, and you don't want to have to think about it too hard. Or if you do, you want to think about the specific elements of it that you want to think about, and not crapola like turn rates. And yet those are still important. So that's why I tend to be so oppositional to arguments of more streamlined the better. The more clean, the more crisp a system, the better. I disagree with that. I think that as long as the complexity is intuitive and can be gotten a feel for without knowing exact details, that's what you want. And it's something that I know I'm maybe in a minority for, especially given I had this one. Yeah. What level of complexity do you favor in RTS games? Most people are going for this option, the streamlined but newest option, and for good reason. There's a lot to be said in favor of games like this. But I think that there is also a lot to be said for some of the more complex ones. Even if you don't agree with my classifications, you get my general idea. And I think a lot of it is because of how you present the complexity to the player, rather than the complexity existing outright. Okay, that was the topic I wanted to lead the stream with, is talking about complexity and mechanics and things of that nature. Next, I wanted to talk about some mod stuff. Then we're going to do Build of the Month, and then we're going to do our special interview. So get ready for that interview, my friends. Again, it's going to be with Daniel Pereira, the legendary creator of the Portuguese Civ mod. So get your questions ready for him if you want to ask about modding or the PCM or things like that. In the meantime, I will check in with you guys, and then we shall move on to 2 cool pieces of modding news that I want to share with you all as well. Okay, let's see. Oh, nice and easy. Yep. Okay, pardon me, I had to catch up. Good take, like the super old Super Smash. Yeah, actually, the N64 Super Smash was really good too. I liked it a lot. I believe in the concept of invisible complexity is interesting. TF2 comes to mind. It's easy to play, but there are many hidden mechanics that you can master a lot of playstyles. That's a great example. I never got into TF2 myself, but I had friends who were in the pro scene, and I absorbed a lot just by looking at them. And the way that you can play that game once you get good at it is insane, and yet it still has immense casual potential. And that's why I do not believe accessibility and complexity are mutually exclusive. You can have both, and you should have both, or you should at least try. I also don't like custom campaigns that have a ton of pre-game slide text you have to sit through. Yeah, I'll be honest, when I was a child, I skipped all of those immediately. But as an adult, I got to like them more, but only after I had a love of history, as well as the fact that I enjoy listening to documentaries. So if that's not your cup of tea, then yeah, I can see why. Strategy and RPGs need the stats description. Imagine Disco Elysium without. It would work, but not for BG3. Yeah, I agree. You need to be able to access the advanced information for strategy games, but I think it doesn't need to be shoved in your face. I think it'd be something that the player finds by themselves, or that you have in the game some sort of advanced play tips, or for those who want to go into more depth, sort of like the Art of War that we have right now, but maybe a little more tiered, such that as you get more advanced, it can explicitly say to you, hey, did you know you could do this? I think that's a great way of doing it. Do you think it's possible to have all 53 civs from AoE 2 have wildly asymmetrical tech trees? Yes, I fully do. I intend to go into how and why in a future episode of Total Overhaul, but I personally believe that AoE 2's current design does not make it easier to balance. It does make it so that you have to try fewer things to balance it. But even if you look at games where each individual character has completely different movesets, again, Smash, you will have the occasional almost unwinnable matchup. But overall, those games are still pretty straightforward to balance. Yeah, you'll have cracked stuff, you'll have top tiers, but especially if you're going about it in a more dynamic fashion, it's not that tough to do. You just have to be diligent about it. And you have to have a good idea of where you want a given character to thrive. If you're making your game solely for a competitive scene, you should balance solely around the competitive scene. I don't believe that's how games should be balanced personally, but if that's what you want to go for, then do it. But yeah, even right now in Age of Empires 2, you have civilizations that are very hard to balance, even though the game is seemingly so simple. And also, as a fun fact as well, when we had fewer civilizations, they were worse balanced. And that's partially because maybe the devs are getting better, maybe the player base is getting better, but it's certainly not because the game is getting simpler. Should the game lie to you and say that bombard cannons are somehow better than elite longbowmen? I don't get that point. No. It shouldn't lie to you, of course. But I do not think that it needs to give you every single detail as to why they are better. You can feel that in practice, and then if you want to click the little button that shows like show expanded stats, then you can get into some details of why. You know what? I'm going to put down this like show expanded stats idea. Show for like a future total overhaul. Expanded stats button. Button per D2R. Yep. Awesome. In American Conquest, once your army gets more casualties, your troops begin to run away, and the game doesn't warn you. You need to learn that Yep, that sounds great. You will learn over time as you play, and I agree, it's fun. Do you think there will be a fighting game with strong accessibility? I wish fighting games were more like chess and somehow someone to analyze your game and understand how you played incorrectly. So I think that I love fighting games. I like them a lot, actually. And there are some fighting games that are actually fantastic with replay functionality to let you see exactly what went wrong and what you can do better. Smash is not one of them, by the way. A great example is, I believe the newest Tekken game lets you not only review footage, but also actually jump into a point in the footage to see how you could have done it better. And it will show all inputs from both sides. That's awesome. That's really cool. Now, the thing is, I don't necessarily know that makes it more accessible. It makes it easier to go from casual to pro, but it's not necessarily more of a draw to casuals, I would say, at a guess. So if you want to inculcate a really strong pro scene for your game, that sort of functionality would be fantastic. If you want more casuals to just be able to pick up the game and goof around and have fun, I don't think that is the way to do it. If a fighting game that is more like chess, though, is also a cool idea. I've had ideas for that myself. And the game that I can think of that is closest to it, like a strategy fighting game, is a game called Toribash. If you haven't heard of it before, I highly recommend taking a look. Toribash. Yeah, let me see if I can find a good link for you. Yeah, here, Toribash. I'll put it in chat because it's fascinating. Toribash is a turn-based fighting game. And it's really cool. Definitely look up a video of the pro scene because wow, it's dense and wow, it's wacky, but it's really cool when you do it well. Just make the civs, fix it later. Yeah, I actually kind of don't disagree with that. It's a reference to Jones 6 that said that. Aha, yeah, blew right over my head. Good reference. AoE 2, there are not enough American civilizations. Yeah, that's something I'd like to tackle in future. Didn't Soul Calibur do this? Yes, I believe the newest Soul Calibur game did this too, but I'm most familiar with the Tekken one. Although maybe I'm just confusing them. Whatever. Fighting games aside, let's talk about some mod stuff, guys. Because we got some cool stuff coming up. Specifically, we have a mod that was brought to my attention by its creator that you guys might enjoy, especially if you liked the Dharma expansion, the fan-made Dharma expansion that came before Dynasties of India, namely Oceans of Churn. Oceans of Churn was created by the same guy, like the same lead dev behind the Dharma mod, though not with his entire team. And it adds 4 new civilizations, the Kalingas, the Bahmanis, the Javanese, and the Somalis. So these are all civilizations that were highly influential in the Indian Ocean. And not only that, but look at these graphics. And a lot of these are handmade. Note the new costuming on the villagers, as well as things like new animals, as well as, I mean, that's pretty standard, but making more use of that. Look at that. He's improving some graphics that he used in Dynasties of India, adding some new buildings, quite a few new buildings. In fact, I think a whole new architecture set. Here's an example of one of the civilizations, the Somalis in this case. That's really sick. Can build. No, they have pastures as well to gather gold. That sick. Look at these. Oh, this is just gorgeous. The custom assets are what I'm most impressed by. That's what the pasture looks like for them. Yeah, I'm just gonna like cycle through these because of how sick they are. But isn't this sick, guys? We have a high quality new mod with tons of custom assets. Including even things like new emblems, new architecture sets, new wonders, all sorts of new stuff, which I think is spectacular. Now, I am going to throw the link to the Oceans of Churn over in the chat, as well as I will have it, oopsies, I will have it for later when I make the description for this video. Definitely check it out. The guy behind it, Juggernaut, is a really talented modder and has just an unbelievable ability to create assets. Look at this. That's sick. And look at that. It's a new building. Like, literally just makes new buildings. This dude, the number of assets he has produced is absurd. And I really look forward to seeing some of the, yeah, he has Chetbong and everything. It's sick. And I really hope that he ends up posting some more of his like bonus boxes and stuff like that. So yeah, if you're actively looking for new mods to get into, and especially if you enjoyed the Dharma expansion, definitely take a look at this fantastic mod. I'm gonna quickly like finish flipping through these just because of how pretty they are. This dude's hovering. I'm walking on sunshine. Anyways, Boita ship looks kind of like a trade cog to me. Hey, look at that! A dude on a elephant that can carry a relic. Sahani. Pretty awesome. Looks like a unique unit. All of these incredible... Oh, here's another bonus box. Bahmani's Gunpowder Civilization. Yep, makes total sense to me. This would be in reference to the Bahmani Sultanate in the Deccan, I believe. I'm pretty sure that's the case. Yeah, and so you have a true gunpowder civilization with the Dakhni, which is something I referenced in my own Deccani civilization. They get the Bombard Elephant, which I still think is historically dubious for this time frame, but whatever. It's still fun. And even a reference to the Malik-e-Maidan, which also appeared in the Dharma expansion. Siege towers are cheaper. That is a fashion statement right there. Nice custom ensigns as well. Kalingans, these guys are really consequential in the Indian Ocean. I want to do a video on them someday. Another like South Indian civilization. They get the small farms thing, which many people discuss. Battle elephants break enemy armor like an oboe. That is pretty sick. Got 3 unique units. Yeah, the Sahani is a healer elephant. Yep, that's something I actually proposed on one of my builds as well. Javanese. You might say, why not the Malay? Malay is a very broad umbrella. I not off the top of my head, but I know that there are at least half a dozen civilizations that fall under that umbrella. So Javanese are a perfect starting point. Chetbong makes total sense. Karis makes a lot of sense. They got these beautiful, like, long knives, short sword type dealios. Let's see. All dock upgrades are free of cost, but need research time. Wow, that is cracked. That's like strictly better than the Italian one. I don't know about that one, but maybe it works in practice. Villagers can build fish traps. That's awesome. And then look at this. All the history artwork. It has the historical entry points. Sublime. Huge round of applause to Juggernaut. What do you guys think about this? Is this the sort of mod that you yourself might check out at some point? Because if so, I'd love to hear your thoughts before we move on to another piece of modding news. And then, I should also reach out and make sure that my special guest is good to go soon. Say, to go in like 10-ish. Marvelous. Okay. Yeah, what do you guys think about this Oceans of Churn mod? I like shouting out big upcoming mods, especially when they're this deserving. Is it still Juggernaut's graphics? Yes, I believe. Are Bahmanis more along the lines of the Marathis or the Deccanis? I believe they're much more Deccani. Yeah, Juggernaut has serious skill. Forgotten Empire should hire him. Yeah, he's incredible. Really talented modder. So it looks so sick. One of them had the old Inca team bonus. Yes, indeed. I would so play the campaigns. Yeah, I cannot recommend Juggernaut's work enough. Looks like a good mod. Most respect for Juggernaut. I'll ask if I can use his graphics. He said yes before. Yeah, he's typically quite generous with these sorts of things. So if you are a modder and you want to use one of his graphics and you're willing to credit him, definitely reach out. I am quite sure he will be willing. And you can message him either over this forum, ModDB, or you can join one of the Discords for his other mods, like the Dharma expansion, and talk to him there. The other thing that I wanted to mention to you guys, I don't have like a slide prepared for this. Let me pull something up. Is I got a really interesting outreach on Discord by a fellow who is actually working on updating a classic old mod to the new game, that being Age of Chivalry. Now, I'm not going to give too much info because apparently this is still in like the mid stages. But he reached out to me, having seen us talking about Chivalry on the channel, and said that he's interested in having his work shown more as it gets closer. But I'll give you some of the information, but not all of them, in case he ends up abandoning the project or pivoting in the project. For those of you who don't know, Age of Chivalry is one of the most legendary mods of all time. It is absolutely incredible. It is a total overhaul, and the big one is that it was made in 2008 during the game's Dark Age, and was updated for almost 10 years. It is only available on disc, however, and HD. No, I think it's just on disc, and very substantially, the mod that this person is working on is attempting to port Age of Chivalry in full to DE, so that we can actually play this amazing revolutionary mod properly for the first time in the new game. Now, again, I'm not gonna like give too much away yet because I want to respect this dude's privacy and all that. But from what he has shown me and talked to me about, not only is he porting all the mechanics, he's porting the frickin' graphics. And even though he seems to be new to modding, he's learning fast, and the screenshots that he showed me looked really promising. So take a look at some of the, if you don't know Age of Chivalry, take a look at some of the features. It was a wild total overhaul to this absolutely, that changed the game in almost every way. Pretty much like what I'm going for with Total Overhaul, which is why it's been on my mind so much. It was, I think, one of the first major mods to add substantial architecture sets. Could be wrong on that, though. And it was, I believe, the first comprehensive Total Overhaul that had a major, and certainly the first one that had a major historical focus. Again, could be wrong on that, though. Legendary mod. It's amazing, and we should pay our respects to it, as well as grateful to this dude who is working hard to bring it to the full game. I really hope that he ends up succeeding. And if he does, you'll be hearing about it on this channel for sure. I will blast it far and wide because of how huge this would be. Have you guys played Age of Chivalry? If so, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, and whether it's something that you're excited to try again or would like to come back to at some point, or whether it's something that you think would need substantial updates in order to be interesting to you again. Yeah, tell me what you guys think. All right, back to Oceans of Churn. Not familiar with history of Southeast Asia. That's why I believe games and other mediums are good to present history. Yep, Malay are a conglomerate of various Indonesian groups. Exactly. Age of Chivalry is great. Reach out. Just thinking about it, reworking it is awesome. Yeah, favorite mod coming to DE. Let's hope he makes it. That would be amazing. We do want it. I certainly want it too. Oh, and before we do our, of course, before we do our interview, last thing before the interview is the build of the month. I got some really good submissions this month. It was legitimately really hard to choose, but I wanted to go with something a little funky and different. It's easy for me to be biased to things that I personally am interested in and care about, and I wanted to shout out this guy. This is an Age of Mythology build based in Game of Thrones, specifically the Seven Kingdoms, and it's made by a fellow who asked to be called Nicholas. And it's applied to Age of Mythology, no less. Now, I'm going to quickly post a shareable link to this in chat in case you guys want to read through as well, because last time I forgot to do that. But take a look through, and especially if you're a Game of Thrones fan, you'll be able to tell me how authentic it is. But to my eyes, just looking at it from a raw mechanics perspective, and also looking at it as someone who loves adapting my favorite fantasy, even though I don't know Game of Thrones myself, it seemed really good, really authentic, really in-depth, and a really creative way to apply a lot of the innate mechanics in Age of Mythology. So I'm just going to take a quick scroll through the things that I wanted to focus on and highlight that I think are really, really cool. first of all, for the hero mechanic, each god unlocks a new class of hero as a trainable unit. That's a cool mechanic. Haven't seen that before. Titan as a giant black dragon who can't fly anymore. That's pretty cool. The favor mechanic I wasn't a huge fan of, which is just passively obtained through building temples. Not a tremendous fan of that, but it hasn't been done. And then also, you have 2 types of villager unit, which great at gathering food and wood. So it's like an inverse dwarf. I think that makes sense. That's cool, and they can defend themselves with those. Really like that idea. Very, very sick. They also have captive laborers, which I think is pretty sick. And also, you can even sell them at a castle. This is the sort of mechanic that I'd love to be able to introduce to other games because I think it's very dynamic and also is very reflective of history, but I know a lot of people are quite squeamish about addressing slavery in games, even in medieval ones. So one of those things that maybe down the line I'll try to address it more. Some games do it really well. You have a bunch of pretty standard sort of unitos. You even got a throwing axeman in there, wouldn't you know? You can, this is an interesting one where you can convert prisoners into this ranged unit. That's a really sick idea. Let's see, there was a few other things that I wanted to do. Oh yeah, you have an anti-siege thing that hurls fire, like flasks of fire. Sick idea too. Again, probably these are great references to the books. I don't know. You actually can get like the proper like creeping cat or turtle version of the battering ram. Nice, makes sense. You have like a strict port of the AoE2 trebuchet. But then you get to the gods, which I think is really interesting. You have not only each one having a unique hero, but you also have like really cool god powers, like transforming an enemy unit into a giant rat that attacks nearby units and heals itself, and it can be hunted for food. That's a sick idea. That's so cool. And you have like the kind of typical bonuses that you would expect to see in the unique tech. But the thing is, all of these are direct, I'm guessing just by looking at them, direct references to the source book. That's really admirable. I think it's extremely cool. And there's a lot of information here. He does the full build in this. So if you are interested in seeing more of this design, definitely take a look. I will also try to put it in the description after we finish the stream. And I full props to Nicholas here, not only for an extremely thorough build that hits pretty much all of the beats I'd want and expect to see on an Age of Mythology Civ, which is not easy. They're very in-depth. But from what I can tell, seems like an exceptionally faithful adaptation of the source material, which is not easy to do. Not easy at all. So marvelously done. Really enjoyed this build and happy to have it be the build of the month, even though I do not know the source material at all. All right, we're going to be firing up our interview with Daniel Pereira in a few minutes. Before I do, any final thoughts from you guys? Any thoughts on this build of the month? And also any, get ready your questions for the conversation with Daniel. I want to hear what you guys have to say. Let's see. Haven't had the occasion to play CD version, so I'd like to try Age of Chivalry. Oh yeah. Did I say I'd make a video on the Oceans of Churn mod? Maybe. I'd have to see, but at the very least I have to shout it out further, if it goes further. Robbie did a short video. Oh, you have a couple of your own things. That's pretty cool. Insane work, good stuff. Completely agree. This build was really well done. I'm working on a fantasy AOM build. Anywhere I can share it when I'm done. You can either stick it and post your builds on the Discord server, or you can send it to my email if you want it to be adapted to a build of the month, which I'm more than happy to do. Okay, in that case, I say it's time. Let's go. Let's call Daniel. How are you doing, Daniel? A little quiet, unfortunately, I cannot hear you. Still not getting any audio through. If you need a moment to check your input device. There we go. Me? Now I'm hearing you.
Let me just adjust the volume on my...
Yeah, sure. You're a little muffled on my end.
Can you hear me? Let's see if this getting the wrong microphone. Oh, right.
Do you hear me better now?
Oh, perfect. Yep, I hear you loud and clear.
Great. So yeah, this is the first time I'm in an actual live stream.
No problem at all, man. It is a pleasure and an honor to have you here. Thank you so much for making the time. First and foremost, how have you been? Any news for you in terms of Age of Empires or any of your other pursuits recently?
Well, there haven't been many major news. I believe you already aware that in a few very soon there will be a release of the next expansion for Age of Mythology Retold,
Yep.
about the Japanese already mixing things up. Other than that, I haven't been working on anything, let's say, new or so to speak. But
Certainly.
I've been mostly focused on this on my end.
Absolutely. Now, for those people who are listening who do not yet know, can you explain what how you are involved with the Age franchise these days? What are you doing?
Well, as I said, these days, you mean all the way back or only right now?
These days.
Oh yeah, so basically I have been part of the Forgotten Empires. I have been mostly working on, exclusively working over Age of Mythology Retold. In the past I used to work on Age of Empires 3 Definitive Edition, and now I'm working on Age of Mythology Retold. And that's pretty much it. There isn't anything new on that end.
Yep, absolutely.
Yes, as everyone knows, I used to be a model in the past, maybe I think more than a decade ago, and now I am here working officially on the franchise.
Yeah, which is not only fantastic and sick, but it's the sort of thing that I and many others have said they really like when they see the game do, is taking great modding talent and adapting it to the team. Something I think a lot of games do and would benefit from doing even more. If I may ask, because I'm sure many people would be curious, what was it? What was the process going from a modder to a member of Forgotten? Did they directly reach out to you? And if so, like, how did that go?
Well, it's actually a sort of convoluted story, actually, because there is another layer of it I haven't delved into. The first time I actually worked officially on the Age franchise wasn't as a translator working on localization for the Age of Empires 2 HD DLCs. That was the first time. Back when I was doing that, I was simultaneously working on a PCM too. So yeah, that timeline is a bit convoluted in this case. So I worked for a quite long time on localization for Age of Empires 2 HD DLCs, but nothing beyond that. I didn't do graphics work or design work. I mean, I did throw some suggestions here and there, but nothing major. And yeah, I only started working on the franchise, something more than a translator back during Age of Empires 2 Definitive Edition, but not in the capacity of a programmer itself, but as on QA. I did some QA for Age of Empires 2 Definitive Edition for some time. Some people back then even spotted that in the credits list and then pinged me, Daniel, we were involved in this all along and you didn't tell anyone. So yeah, but yeah, it was just a QA back then, didn't do anything. I only really got into working on actual game code, actual game engine code during Age of Empires 3 Definitive Edition. As I had mentioned, I had also been AoE 3 modder. I had worked in the past in Wars of Liberty, and I also, alongside another modder and programmer from the Napoleonic era mod, I developed a small patch for modders for Age of Empires 3, which is the unhard code patch, which is mostly intended to extend the hard code limits within the AoE 3 engine.
Oh, nice.
And yeah, all of that, I would say, sort of prepared me to be ready to work later on the game engine itself.
Yeah, that makes
People are
a lot of
already
sense.
more or less familiar with the work I did, so I was in a sense already in the team, and so the transition was more or less natural, so to speak.
Nice. That's awesome. Well, it's not only very heartening to hear, But it also seems like you bounced through kind of a lot of versions of working on the Age franchise in one capacity or another, like way more than I anticipated. And that makes sense. Like these sort of things evolve pretty naturally and pretty rapidly. Similarly, do you ever feel any, like, I don't know, whiplash in terms of not having like complete creative control, or is it the sort of thing that you've parted ways with, you've washed your hands of, and you don't mind working on someone else's vision rather than forwarding your own?
So, yeah, in this case, I really don't. I would say that, in a sense, I still have some desire to actually implement my visions, but not on the other games. I actually had some ideas of mine for new AoE 3D civilizations that I would like to put my hands on. But yeah, at this point, I don't really don't mind in the end.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I know that that would drive me
In this case,
crazy.
I'm. I wouldn't say I am a. I have a designer's mind anymore. I'm not saying that I don't dabble with random ideas and such, but that's no longer my focus right now.
Totally. That makes a lot of sense. Something that I also wanted to ask is, do you ever think that maybe down the line, if it ever no longer is viable or something that you're not interested in, or you're just comfy with life and want to move on, have you ever considered actually creating a fresh game from scratch, or participating in the creation of a fresh game from scratch? Or do you think that you're so kind of locked in on the AoE2 engine and the the Age franchise engines that it would be hard to move to a different model?
Well, I personally wouldn't mind that ended up being necessary, moving to another another game or something like that. But I personally don't have ideas myself for a new game. I mean, I do have the ideas, but I do know that executing the actual development is not an easy task, not
Yes.
a one-man effort.
Not
It's
even
one
close.
thing to work on scratch on a mod with a limited team, but working on a full game from scratch is quite complicated, especially when you are dealing with a genre like RTS that's quite limited in scope when it, not in scope, I mean, but on its reach. Not many people play RTS games nowadays, so making a new RTS game from scratch, a completely new IP, make it appealing to players is far more complicated than it seems. So,
Yeah.
it's not an endeavor I will try to work on myself, or try to initiate myself. I know it would be far more complicated, as I mentioned, than working on a new mod by myself. But if I ever came to that, I wouldn't mind changing my area of work.
Totally.
As
Yeah.
I said, deep down, I'm more of a programmer myself than a game designer nowadays. So really wouldn't mind. But yeah, currently I love having the opportunity to work on the Age franchise.
Yeah, absolutely. It must be surreal, especially at first, to have gone from modder to an official dev, which is absolutely sick. Along those lines, uh, based on your role as a modder and then as a developer to some degree, what are some ways in which you specifically think the Age franchise has just like wildly improved, either a specific game or like a family of games, in a way that people might not realize it's improved?
Well, I think the first improvement that I would mention would be on AOS 3D, because the on the 50th edition we got rid of something that has been a reason for why many people disliked AOE 3, because not sure how familiar you are with it, but
A bit.
on the original game, in order to unlock all of the homestead cards, you had to play the game a lot, gather experience, so on and so forth, and only then you have access to all of the homestead cards. In D, we removed that restriction. On the
Oh,
original game, it pretty much made players, pretty much made multiplayer itself, the multiplayer environment, very, very unbalanced. You
yeah.
could have a player who is quite familiar with RTSs, but quite recently arrived to AoE3 and has only a level 1, level 2 HC, playing against a level 50 HC, while the level 1 player, who is quite experienced with RTS games, has a limited set of cards to choose from, while the other one has all of the possible cards.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that made AoE3, in my opinion, even though it's my favorite game in the franchise, far more appealing, in my opinion, far more balanced. It removed the major block that prevented people from getting to the game. And yeah, I could also mention the thousands, not thousands, but it's a hyperbole, the many quality of life improvements that have been made to AoE2, the Eon's release. Auto farm receding, automatic kill, automatic fishing trap receding, and so on. So yes, I would say that's the two major improvements that I would mention by mind that, in my opinion, improved the game experience quite a lot.
Yep, I completely agree with that assessment. But the Home City card one is a really interesting point that I would not have thought to add. But no, you're right. That I can't believe that wasn't the case in the first place. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a major criticism raised against AoE3 back during the time it was released. It was mitigated, so to at some extent, on TAD, I believe, the second expansion, where all players began with a level 10 HC, which is far less crippling than beginning with a level 0 HC.
Yeah.
So at least with a level 10, you have a bit more interesting cards.
Yep.
And cards play a giant role on AoE3. Some people even say that, although I disagree with that AoE3 pretty much became a RNG game, so to speak, because of this card system. Because while on the other games, you already know the tech tree of the other players, you already know the units you will field, the technology you can research. When you're dealing with a game where each player can choose a lot of cards, to some players it looks like another layer of randomness added over it. As someone who, of course, is a bit biased, I was in the AoE3 mod, it's my favorite game. I don't agree with the assessment, but I can see why it's seen that way.
Yeah, to me, that the idea that another player's choice is randomness is hooey to me. I don't agree with that statement at all. I can see why it might tilt people out. I'd love to have mechanics in play wherein maybe if you do a certain amount of scouting or something like that, you can like peek at what their cards are. I don't know, something like that. But the reason that I love mechanics like that is it gets down to poker, because if you don't know exactly what the enemy is working with, then you have to read them, and you have to either guess or predict or try to figure out a meta, and it allows you to deceive opponents, which is something I actually mentioned recently in my Total Overhaul videos. Is something that I think is really important, being able to deceive people. So yeah, I love that mechanic. I think that mechanic is sick.
Yeah, half of the cards aren't exactly hidden. You can see the cards your opponent has picked, but thing is, you don't know which cards he can choose beforehand.
Oh,
I mean, unless if you have all comprehensive knowledge of all the homicide cards, you don't know which ones he will choose beforehand, and on the top of that, you don't know when he will play one card. I mean, people may feel like people that aren't familiar with the game may feel cheated at if at Industrial Age, for example, a player after gathering a lot of gold suddenly drops 10 mercenaries onto the card, and the mercenaries will pop up and start ravaging anything they see on front of them. People that aren't familiar with the game may feel cheated at that.
Yeah, the unfamiliar with the game.
That's more or less what I'm aiming for.
Yeah.
You don't know what the enemy will throw at you, one way or another.
Yeah, I think that's a presentation thing too, because especially if a newer player gets frustrated by that, the idea that I'd say is, okay, how can we present this information in a way that helps them get into it before just like springing it on them, I guess. But even so, I love the idea of being able to make plays like that and deceive your opponents or work around a meta or bluff. All these things I think are really fun. But so in summary, really cool to see some of the things that you think are vast improvements. I'm going to be, because even though you haven't modded in a while, I'm sure people will be curious. And by the way, for anyone watching, please get your questions ready for Daniel. I'm going to review them in a moment. But in terms of AoE 2, given that that's what my channel largely focuses on, but also AoE 3 if you want to add to that, what suggestions would you have for people who are modding or are getting into modding that you think are underrated tips for modding? Like stuff that people often will overlook or neglect to think about that you think are extremely important when going in and modding AoE 2 in particular?
Well, I don't really have anything very specific that would come to mind, but one thing I would, of course, may sound obvious, but I would say that the most crucial thing that needs to be kept in mind is that you need to get a good grasp on how the engine itself works and how the game does stuff, so to speak. So if you are already familiar with how, for example, which kinds of stats can be modified through text, how each bonus on each civilization is actually implemented, how every aspect of the game works within the engine data itself. Of course, it maybe sound a bit not obvious, I'm going to say, but I would say it's the most crucial thing that needs to be kept in mind before delving into modding. You need to know the game well and how it implements every bonus. For example, knowing what the game can do, it helps a lot into developing a civilization that both blends with the game well and also makes it easier to implement it.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Of course, I'm not sure if it's an outstanding tip, but it's the first thing that really comes to my mind that sometimes it is not really thought of.
No, you're completely right. I think it's a very important tip. From what I understand, having spoken extensively with a very talented modder who's helped me a lot, Age of Empires 2 in particular treats almost everything in the game as a resource, even if it only displays 4 of them. And so the example I was given that when you research heresy, that technology researching unlocks a resource called heresy, of which you have 1 and never get more or less, and that having that resource makes units die instead of being converted. Is that a decent summary, and is that the way that it worked back during disc days?
Yeah, that's pretty much how it was implemented. And that's one example of knowing this. By knowing, for example, that the game keeps a lot of variables stored as resources, it gives ideas on how new mechanics, new bonuses can be set up.
Yeah.
For example, I did mention once the trebuchet monk thing that Saracens have on PCM.
Yes.
Monks that can convert buildings at 60 plus range. And that's pretty much how it was found by another modder that was working on his mod back then. He found out that this particular behavior, building conversion, was controlled by resource, a very specific resource. I don't remember the ID here. When you research Redemption, I believe that's the technology, it says that resource to 1.
Mm-hmm.
And while I experiment with this, he found out that when changing the value of that resource from 1 to 2, it removed the range restriction for monks.
Yo,
completely.
That's so cool.
So they no longer needed to be very close to be debuilding to initiate the conversion.
Wow.
So yeah, that's why I say that even though it may seem obvious, knowing how the game engine does things, how certain bonuses, certain mechanics are implemented and work on an engine level helps a lot when designing, when coming out with ideas and so on.
Absolutely. No, that's a great example, and it's really cool to hear too. I suppose before we jump into questions, if people have questions for you, which again, I would highly recommend if you guys have questions for Daniel to put them in chat. The final like kind of prepared question I have that I think could be interesting and useful, though I'll of course ask you to talk about other topics later as well as if you're open to it, is of the civilizations that you implemented back in the day in the PCM. We went over a bunch of them in our video, of course. I'm really happy with how that thing turned out. But of the civilizations that you implemented back in the day, which was the hardest to implement and why? Were there any that you got like massively stuck on for a while and then found a solve for?
I do have an answer for that, but not in the way you are expecting. I would say that one of the most time-taking ones was the Indians, but not for the reason that you really expected. First of all, my original design for it involved 2 elephant units. I wanted to have an elephant monk similar to the one that the other module showcases would have.
Yeah.
And I wanted to have okay, not an elephant in this case. I want to have a Zamburak, which would be a mounted gun on a camel. It's actually historical in this case, but I couldn't find anyone to make the graphics, and I had to pillage the original Indian bonuses I had to implement the Swahili. So I had to put the Indian civilization on hold indefinitely as it didn't have graphics for it. And there is another point I would like to make, that I didn't want to implement the Indians without, how can I say, boundary breaking bonds, as you mentioned on the other interview. I didn't really wanted them to stand out somehow.
Yeah.
And what made me stuck in this case was in AOE 3, the Indians, to reflect their religious aspects, they are forbidden from gathering any kind of meat. You cannot gather livestock. You can hunt, but you cannot gather livestock to represent the religious aspect, let's say. And they actually, on AOE 3, Indians, they task calls to sacred shrines. I'm not sure exactly how they're named. It has been a long time since I played them. And I know it kind of testifies against me as being an AOE 3 expert. It has been a very long time. I haven't played with Indians, but you task them to shrine they generate XP. And I thought, I need to get this into the game somehow. But yeah, back then there was no way to do, let's say, special actions like that. The closest thing you could get is tasking them to somewhere and gathering food, but not something I wanted to do. So I had this idea stuck in my mind. I had to somehow prevent villagers from gathering from sheep, which is the closest thing I could get to this, and somehow make sheep generate resources. In this case, it ended up being food and wood when garrisoned within a bill. That's the closest thing I could get.
Yeah.
And just to be clear, back then I didn't know anything about Star Wars Galactic Battle Routes.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
I only found out
this. You got it from them.
But yeah, I really didn't know. I only knew that SWGB had something like this when I talked to a friend of mine who is a Star Wars fan, a hardcore Star Wars fan, and also a player of SWGB. And I thought, I want to do this. And I say, just like pastures. What's the name of the building on SWGB that does that?
I don't know.
Yeah, just like that building. I have no idea. I never played it. So yeah, it was an idea that came naturally, but I got stuck into that civilization, had to put in the freezer for a quite long time due to that. And it was actually quite interesting how I managed to take that civilization out of the ground. Because roughly not at that time, I believe, months later, maybe a full year, I don't remember, alpha/beta build of AOE 2 got leaked. There are two ones on circulating around the web before, but this one was special for one thing. It had a more or less functional trade goods mechanic. I believe not. Have you ever read the leaked AOH design document or not?
I have read parts of it, but I don't actually know the trade goods mechanic. Could you explain it?
So basically, you on this document there is a paragraph that describes this mechanic, and basically, when garrisoning villagers into trade workshops, they would generate trade goods progressively. I'm not sure what's the trade goods resource, which is resource number 9. That's one thing I memorized. Resource number 9, or if they generated gold directly, but they had it is described within that document, and that build had it. If you garrisoned villagers into a trade workshop, I believe you still needed to place a trade workshop on the editor. They started slowly generating either gold or trade goods, one of those two resources. It was found by another friend of mine who was a modder also back then. And when I found it, the first thing that came in my mind is, now I can get the Indians in. So I threw that the exe file of the data build into the assembler and tried to locate the exact line of code that controlled that.
Wow.
And then I used the file from another friend of mine to locate where the number of garrisoned units, the full number of garrisoned units, because there is one very interesting thing that for that particular mechanic, it only takes in account garrisoned villagers.
Yeah.
Only garrisoned villagers. So if you garrison anything else, it wouldn't amount to resource generation. So I found that exact piece of code that controller resource generation, and from a file from another friend of mine, I managed to find out where the number of garrison units is stored, and combining those two, I could finally implement the meal resource generation.
Wow.
For the Indians. So yeah, it was a civilization that ended up being harder to implement. Took far longer than I expected, but not
Yeah.
exactly for the usual reasons, so to speak.
And for those who don't know, this was done before the Gurjars were even a twinkle in the eye of the developers. Indeed, well before DE was a twinkle in their eye. That's a great story. That's really cool. And it's a good example of how you need to think when you go into modding. Is of like problem solving and understanding the engine and chipping away at it. All right, let's do some questions. Because we got some questions.
Can I
from the
just
chat.
add
Please.
one thing that I remember before going to the
course.
questions? Do you want to hear about a really time-taking effort in this case, a civilization that become hard to implement, but because of a very repetitive task that I had to do a lot of times?
Fire
Do you
away.
want to hear that?
I do want to
Because
hear it.
I believe you are probably waiting for something like that. I was just looking at the file and I remember this. I think I have mentioned the other day about the Shona that was supposed to represent the Great Zimbabwe people. And that one was slightly time-taking for one reason. For their bonus, they train units on banner armies, so to speak, just like the Chinese do on TAD. So yeah, to ensure that banner armies would probably update their icons, I had to create, let's say, separate dummy units for every possible combination.
Oh, God.
So for example, we have the banner army of swordsman plus spearman. I had to create a militia plus spearman, militia plus pikeman, militia plus halberdiers, just to ensure that the icon would be updated, and so on and so forth.
Oh, that's
that
gross.
was time-taking. And that led to bugs. And when you combine that with the support unit of the Leonese, that is a unique upgrade for swordsman, I had to also account for it.
Oh.
So yeah, that was another civilization that took longer to implement, that gave me some headaches, but not for a very interesting, funny reason. I mean, perhaps it's funny, not when
It is funny.
when you have to.
Pain in the ass, though. Jeez.
Yeah.
Wow. All right. That's a good example of the sort of things you have to bash your head against when you're modding, too. All right. Got some questions for you, my friend. Question from Fulgurating Bean. How did you break the civ number limit in the original game, and do you believe it could be done in DE? I can add one piece of context to this, which is that Cision, I believe, was the one who broke the civ limit, and then you piggybacked off it. Is that true?
The history is a bit longer.
Yeah.
So basically, the first one to break the civ limit was a Chinese modder that posted it in somewhere. I believe in it was Age of Kings Heaven, but was in Chinese, so no one understood it. Someone got hold of that guide and managed to translate it. That someone was Thysian, actually. I think Thysian located that forgotten guide. Not the pun was not intended. Found that forgotten guide and managed to unlock the civ limit.
Wow.
And then Scriptor from User Patch managed to make that more flexible and not rely on very specific EXE changes. So instead of having to change the EXE at a very specific offset, at a very specific case, every time you want to try the new civ, Scriptor on his user patch, which has been a treasure for the community. I believe the most essential project ever made for AUH2.
Wow.
I dare to say that if the user patch never existed, the AUH community would be what it is today. It
Shit.
had new features for modding, for random app scripting, for AI scripting. I dare to say it completely changed it. AUH2 community.
That's incredible.
Scriptor managed to transfer all of that behavior by manipulating the game code into a XML file. So instead of having to dig your way through the exe to extend the civ limit, you could just install user patch and edit out the XML file for your personal mod.
Wow. Okay, who is the creator of that user patch thing again?
Scriptor. We never knew his real name. It is a site. I can send the. I will send the address on your Discord.
Yeah, please. I'd love to look into that story because, frankly, that sounds. The fact that you say it's the single most, important mod that has ever been created.
I just sent you on Discord DMs.
Yeah, please. That's incredible. Okay, what do we got here?
So yeah, and on AUH2D, I believe there is already support. I admit I'm not exactly on the loop regarding modding, but I believe there is already support for extending the civilization limit by editing a .json file that is within the game files. But I admit I haven't looked into that. I haven't done any work on AUH2D, and I'm quite out of the loop. I just believe I saw this on patch notes. If I locate it, I promise I will link that to you.
Thank you.
So
that would be
can
great.
Question can probably answer.
Because this has been in the community. This has been a major question and talking point, an element of debate for quite some time, and it certainly would open up an awful lot. So that's a great answer and great question. Thank you very much. Godflesh asks, how have you developed your skills as a modder, and is it difficult to balance mechanics and historical authenticity?
Well, it is going to sound a bit, how can I say, obvious, but I started from the very beginning, so to speak. So when I started, actually, I believe I mentioned this on the other interview, my very first modding project was actually an attempt to make a total conversion.
Yeah.
I already had some very limited knowledge of image editing. I could do copy-paste buildings on Paint. Back then, a friend of mine taught me a very basic Photoshop skills so I could do better graphics. And at the same time, I also learned how the game handled adding and modifying graphics, how technologies were set up, how units were set up, how certain mechanics were set up, how each of the eye-catching bonuses were set up. So it was a slow process. I had to start from the very scratch. And basically, the higher you aim, the more you have to learn about the engine, the more you have to get familiar with how the game data does stuff. Basically that. So that's how I develop. I wanted to do this. How can I implement this specific bond? Then I need to look back in for example, take an example. The scout bonds is on for the Portuguese. That Portuguese needed to. They have this bond where they start with 2 scouts. I had to first look into how those starting units were set up. If there was any way that I could make 1 unit spawn 2 units, which there is, Town Center uses a similar mechanic, and that is how you slowly build up your skills. Set up a goal, I want to do this, and you say, are there any things that are similar to this already in the game? And then you start playing with that things until you get more familiar with the engine itself.
No, that's a great way of putting it.
And yeah, the more complex bonds you are aiming for, the more complex the mechanics you are aiming for, the more familiar you have to get to the engine, and the more familiar you get with the engine, the more the better you get when implementing new mechanics, and the more inspiration you have for new bonuses possibilities.
Yeah.
So it is how can I say? It's positive feedback.
Yeah.
It's a self-feeding cycle. I'm not sure if I'm using the right term, but it's positive feedback.
Yeah, feedback loop.
Yeah, feedback loop, yes. Sorry, because it's called positive feedback positive, positive feedback in Portuguese. That's I try to, so yeah.
No,
And as for the other one, I do admit, as for the second part of the question, I do admit that sometimes I didn't pay too much attention to the historical aspect, but sometimes you can turn certain historical aspect into a nice bonus. So, for example, the Portuguese, they are known for being explorers, they are known for being seafarers. How can you portray that in the game? You make them start with 2 scouts, and, for example, that's very mechanics, a catch mechanic that represents a historical aspect. The Congolese, for example, they were known for being able to field in soldiers very quickly. How do you represent that? To give them ship soldiers and a technology that generates 3 units for you.
Yeah.
And so on and so forth. So yeah, I wouldn't say that historical accuracy and interesting mechanics are opposite to are diametrical opposites. They can be conciled. You just need to be a bit, how can I say, creative. Although I wouldn't call myself creative sometimes. A lot of times I drew inspiration for other games, other mods, and so on and so forth, and all of that influenced me on my ideas a lot of times. So yes, they are not. And sometimes you need to jump the shark and do something that's just crazy, because sometimes history can, how can I say, can feel a bit boring. I mentioned Wars of Liberty, for example, and the original creator of that mod sometimes relied on very absurd, in a good sense, understandings of historical aspects to make the civs eye-catching, to make boundary-breaking mechanics. So sometimes that's what you need to do.
Yeah.
You don't need to discard history altogether, but you can interpret it into a creative way to make a fun mechanic. I'm going to say an accidental historical inspiration, that a random idea that ended up being historical. For the Galicians, I wanted to make, how could I put it, the ultimate slinging civilization. So, if I'm not mistaken, for their team bonus, I made a coin Asian banking for free right at the beginning of the game. I believe that's what I did. And I didn't know about this. This actually had an accidental historical precedent, because if I'm not mistaken, the Kingdom of Galicia was the first kingdom after the fall of Rome to manage to mint coins.
You're kidding me.
So, if I'm not mistaken, I may be mixing up, but I remember I calling it that. So, a kingdom that was the first minute kind to have coinage for free right at the beginning of the game makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
And was 100% accidental.
Nicely done. That's a great accident. No, that's a something I can add to what you were saying here is, especially you're saying, oh, Portuguese, known for exploring, known for seafaring. You're still trying to acknowledge their history, but you're looking at it from like a bird's eye view. It's like a zoomed out view of the history rather than picking a specific fact and saying, I am referencing this. So you're kind of alternating the magnification that you're putting the history under and saying, okay, this bonus is talking about broad strokes of the history. This bonus maybe is referencing something specific. So yeah, I like to think about historical authenticity in terms of how zoomed out it is. Yeah, if you guys have other questions, by the way, please do post them. It looks like we have a couple more, and then we'll open the floor to Daniel for the final stuff, unless you guys have more you want to look into. Another question from Godflesh. Is it possible to implement the trade workshop now in DE? I'm assuming in terms of how it was originally intended.
I believe maybe it depends on how the Gurjaras bonus works. I admit I haven't looked into it. But if it is not tied to ship, if it is just taking the total number of garrison units and multiplying it by predefined rates, predefined rates within either unit data or resource data, then I believe we could just copy those attributes into the trade workshop and allow it to be garrisonable by villagers, and then changing the resources from food and into gold. So I believe it could be implementable.
I think I can actually add to this that not only do I think it's implementable, I think you can actually go even further in terms of the fact that I believe that even if you wanted to try to make it, you do the original trade goods thing, I believe it is actually possible to quantify a new, maybe even displayable resource called trade goods, I think. And then put those in. The reason I think it's actually it is possible to do it as villagers is I did a build for the Shillans, which had a mechanic wherein villagers could garrison in lumber camps to generate wood. And I did run that by a couple modders before I posted the video, and they thought it was good. They're like, yeah, I'm pretty confident you can do this. So I believe it is doable, and it's not just limited to sheep.
Oh, then that's awesome. That's great.
Another one is, can hostile NPCs be generated? And if so, what are their limitations? What can they do? I'm assuming this means like hostile wild animals, but maybe as like barbarians or raiders or something that is controlled by no one and attacks everyone. I assume that's what is being gone for here. Do you know if that is doable?
So pretty much like Treasure Guardians on AOE3, but actually hostile to you.
I think that's the intention, yeah.
Well, it's pretty much possible. I believe you could just adjust the random app script to, instead of adding more wolves, you would add the Gaia / Mother Nature owned military unit, and I believe there are attributes within game data that prevents Mother Nature unit from being capturable by players, but has been a long time since I delved with it. It's actually quite interesting because, if I'm not mistaken, the original design document, there is this outlaws mechanic where some maps would begin with Mother Nature owned outlaws that, if you got very close to them, they would start chasing you and shooting arrows at you and so on and so forth. There is not sure on DE data, but on original CD data, there was a hidden outlaw unit that probably was the one that this part on the design document referred to, that was likely the one that would be spawned. So the unit did exist. It would be just a matter of ensuring that once it is placed, it wouldn't be convertible when your units got nearby. I believe that's doable, but I admit it is not something I have looked into. But if that's doable, it's just a matter of editing out the RMs, which now indeed are as flexible as they were with user patch on the original game. So there won't be any issues with that.
Sick. That's great. That's really cool. I actually didn't know about that bit. Now, obviously, if you guys have other questions, you can trickle them in. But the last thing that I wanted to just generally say to you, Daniel, not only thank you for coming and sharing more of your time and giving us some more information about behind the scenes and modding stuff and things like that. We'll do one more brief round of questions after this. But are there any topics that we haven't gone over yet, including in that original video, that you'd want to share, especially stuff that either hasn't come up or that you've maybe always wanted to say to people about the PCM or some of your other projects, or what it's like now at Forgotten or anything of that nature? I want to leave the floor open to you if you have any topics you want to bring to the fore.
Did I ever talk about mechanics that I wanted to implement but had to discard them or not?
No, you did not. That is exactly the sort of thing I was wanting to hear.
So yes, back during original development for the original installment, so to speak, of PCM, there are a few mechanics that I wanted to get in, but I never managed to implement in the end. One thing that an idea that I, not only myself, but a lot of modders always wanted to see in the game would be salvageable ruins from buildings and such.
Yep, I want that too.
Are you sure I didn't talk about this on the other interview?
I do not remember hearing this at
But
all.
yeah, in any case, it's a very interesting story in the end, at least in my view. So that's something I always wanted to implement. So basically, if you destroy the building, you leave salvageable ruins that, if gathered by villagers, you could replenish your stockpiles from the resources left behind by destroyed enemy buildings. But here's the thing. I did try to implement that feature twice, actually. But in the first time, I noticed that if you deleted a foundation, your own foundation, you would leave salvageable ruins behind.
No.
So if you just built 2 HP and deleted it, puff, and this pretty much became infinite gold farming, infinite money glitch.
Damn it.
Then I had to
Oops.
discard that. And later on, when I was another mod was playing around one of the leaked alphas of AUE2, they noticed that the salvageable ruins thing was fully functional in the alpha. So if you kill the trade card at the right moment, it would drop a small unit that would contain a bit of stone. I don't know why it behaves like that, but it was there to drop a bit of stone. And there was a large building, I believe a castle, that if you
It's the trade
destroyed
card's
it,
pet rock.
if you destroyed it, it would leave a giant stack of resources that would gradually deplete.
Yeah, makes sense.
And when I say this, that oh boy, I have hit the lottery. That's exactly what I wanted. I tried to implement it on PCM, I believe on one of the PCM 3 betas, but there is one thing that didn't work very well. It turned out that it made the game unstable.
Oh.
Literally, the game started crashing randomly, maybe because those ruins storing more than one resource made the game access invalid memory, and this caused the game to go haywire and randomly crash. So I had to throw these mechanic away. I couldn't implement it.
That would have been so sick.
I still got something, let's say, useful from it, because the same data from that mechanic, I could repurpose it for the Dutch bonds. The Dutch, when they lose a building, they leave militia behind.
Yeah.
So I could use that very specific attribute that defined a unit to be spawned upon the destruction of a building for that. So
That's
yeah,
great.
It wasn't a complete loss in the end.
Yeah, indeed. Not a complete loss. That's a really cool story.
Another thing too is that you know that Raider civilizations in PCM2 they could unpack their buildings.
Yes.
That was actually something I wanted to do in PCM1, but if I'm not mistaken, back then I couldn't figure out how to make that work in all cases, and I only really figured it out during through Scripter's help. Scripter helped me a bit on this, and then I could implement this mechanic in its full potential in PCM too. Another thing I wanted to do actually, I may have talked about this, but I wanted Raider civilizations to actually have completely different tech trees. So,
you did not
for
mention
example,
that, but I agree.
I didn't.
Nope, didn't
Well, in
mention
any
it
case,
all.
they will have completely different tech trees. That's something I wanted to do. I even outlined them on paper, but sadly I lose all of my notes on that.
Ah.
I wanted them for example, to not be able to construct farms, to be reliant on raiding for resources, to be able to train cavalry archers right from age 2 and be able to build some sort of fortification, not stone fortification, but very basic fortification to train the raider units from the game on. But yeah, as one of my friends said back then, this would make the game far more aggressive than it needs to be. And it would be a time-taking effort because I would need a whole new nomad building set. And on the top of that, I really wonder if I would be going too far on making the game asymmetrical. An asymmetrical design works well on AoE 3, on AoM, but maybe it wouldn't work too well on AoE 2.
I don't know. I love
believe it-
asymmetrical designs.
Yeah, I do love it, but perhaps I would be taking it too far if I had managed to implement it.
Maybe. It would have been fun to see if nothing else. But yeah, I can see why you wouldn't want to sink all that time in just to have it, like, possibly not be good.
And another thing, you mentioned that thing about invisible complexity. One idea I considered, it wouldn't be that invisible, but it would be an unnecessary complexity. I believe you are aware of the knowledge resource on Rise of Nations, right?
I've heard of it, yes.
So yeah, basically on Rise of Nations, you need to, in order to research advanced technologies, you have to build a university, train scholars, and task scholars to work on the university. So a friend of mine who was a modder, they managed to get a code from Scripter that would add a sixth resource on the UI counter.
Nice.
And then I started thinking, how, and that modder sent that to me, and then I started thinking, how could I get that to work? Maybe I could turn that to a mechanic. And then I started discussing with another friend of mine, also a modder, about this. What if I added the knowledge resource and added advanced technologies that could be researched for it? But yeah, that modder pointed out very well to me that this would be adding another layer of complexity that doesn't need to be added in this case. It wouldn't bring any benefits to the player. It would bring another resource the player needs to care about and probably wouldn't notice it existed until they would build the universe and see they cannot research any of the technologies.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's on one case of unnecessary complexity, and at some point, at something also invisible that will just make the players' lives harder for no reason. So
yeah, it's
that's
a very visible piece of complexity that locks a piece of the game behind understanding it.
yeah, but not something that players would understand from the get-go. That
Yeah.
they wouldn't expect it. When you are playing an Age of franchise game, you won't expect technologies to cost 4 normal resources, and suddenly realizing you have a special 6 resource to research some technologies, players will likely only realize it too late.
Absolutely. Something that I've always quite liked is the idea of techs taking a long time, like way longer than they do now. but having certain benefits that make them go faster and them not blocking production queues. I don't know if maybe that could be a way to implement the scholar idea without doing another resource of text take a long ass time, but if you put a scholar on it, then suddenly it takes less ridiculous amounts of time. But I'm not sure. It would wildly change the dynamics of the game, and probably would be better for a fresh game than to apply to Age of Empires.
Yeah, definitely. In the end, it's not an Age of Empires-ish mechanic.
Yeah, exactly. It is distinctly Rise of Nations. Those are great. Those are really interesting stories and very cool topics to go over. But that is all that I had planned. Before we sign off, did you have any other things that you wanted to share with me or the audience, or are you feeling good?
For having ideas, you can feel free to comment, but I don't have anything on my mind right now.
Marvelous. Well, in that case, Daniel, it has been a pleasure getting to talk to you again. I and many of my viewers are huge admirers of your work and are very grateful for your contributions to the game, both as a modder and now as a dev. So thank you very much for taking the time. It's been a pleasure hearing your voice, and I hope to speak more in the future.
Thank you. So it's also an honor to be here. I actually want to just make a small remark that will sound a bit random. You mentioned about historical authenticity and making interesting civilization outlines, civilization designs. There's another thing that I remembered about my Abyssinians/Ethiopians design.
Yeah.
As you know, there's that entire legend of Abyssinians holding the Ark of Covenant and so on and so forth. And that influenced two of their bonds on PCM.
Really?
That's another thing that can make civilizations being authentic. If you know there are for something, there are legends assigned to them that are recognizable by players, that's a great way to make the civilization feel both authentic and creative. For example, they start with a relic once you start the game.
Mm-hmm.
So you have a relic nearby. That's actually something that a friend of mine, another modder, figured out how to do in the past. And that's an idea I took in some sense. And on the top of that, they also have a slow growth threshold that becomes greater depending on the age you are in.
Yeah.
So yeah, as I said, another suggestion how civilization can feel authentic without making them sound bland or sound too uninteresting.
Totally. No, that's a great point as well. And I appreciate you sharing that and all the other advice and input that you've had. For any of you who are watching, who are aspiring mod makers especially, but also civ designers more broadly, Daniel is a great person to look to. And he has done more to implementing his visions than pretty much anyone else in the history of the game, with only a handful of exceptions. You mentioned the Age of Chivalry mod being a huge inspiration for you, and like I mentioned earlier in the stream, it looks like there is some effort to try to update it to DE. So maybe if that happens, we'll be able to drag the original creator of that out from his normal life and ask him about his process too someday.
Yeah, that would certainly be something I would love to say. As I mentioned on the other interview, I didn't know modding was even possible before Age of Chivalry. It was the first time I saw modding as a possibility.
Absolutely.
Pretty much what inspired me to go on this journey.
And isn't it funny how so too, your mod, specifically the long range monks, was one of my first exposures to at least total overhaul modding, if not modding in general. And so these we influence each other through a long thin chain.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time, Daniel. It has been a pleasure, and I will see you later, my friend.
Sure, I enjoy the opportunity. Hope to talk to you in the future.
Likewise, bud. Have a great day.
Likewise. Goodbye.
Perfect. All right, guys. Hope you enjoyed the interview with Daniel. We're going to be signing off pretty shortly, but before I do you guys have any final questions or topics you would like me to address? Any old thing that we've discussed. Can be Invisible Complexity, can be Banner Saga, can be Darkest Dungeon, can be Total Overhaul, Portuguese Civ mod, upcoming mods, any old thing. If you have final questions before we sign off, I would love to hear them. And otherwise, we will take our leave for now. I'll give it a couple minutes for things to roll in. And I also would love to hear, how'd you like the interview with Daniel? If you're a modder or an aspiring modder of any kind, was it an interesting and useful thing for you? If so, I would love to hear your thoughts. And if not, no worries whatsoever. I've been trying to make sure that the guests that I have for these are all ones that are linked into kind of the core premise of the channel. Of which modding is definitely closest, but maybe in future we'll start to get guests who are like a little further afield to see if we can broaden our horizons a little bit. Something that I will also mildly note is that for future live streams, though we will always make sure to tie it back into Age of Empires and some of our projects, there is another game that I am hoping to discuss briefly in a live stream. If you guys are interested in it, I'll probably put out a poll at some point. Namely, I'd like to talk a little bit about Magic the Gathering, which is a game that I discovered when I was 11 and was wildly influential on me for like 6 years and still has some like hooks into me, even though I fell out of love with the game about not quite 10 years ago, but almost 10 years ago. So if you guys are interested, I'll put out a poll. If you guys are interested in hearing me talk a little bit about Magic the Gathering with a guest who is in the Age of Empires community and also has strong thoughts about Magic the Gathering, let me know. Okay, and let's see. Before we hit Magic the Gathering, hell yeah. Thank you for asking, Godflesh, to say a little bit about Enclave, given your question. What is the setting? What are your inspirations for it? Enclave has it's a big story, but I think the summary is Enclave is actually setting agnostic. It takes place in an infinite world, a self-contained multiverse functionally, where every single time you play, it is in a different setting. Your characters are all members of effectively like a mercenary organization at the heart of this infinite world, and every time you play, they teleport you across the world to a different environment to do a mission in. And this means that not only can you be in someplace new every time, but if you like a place or you want to have a specific genre or feel, you can just like continuously go back to those. So it's extremely flexible. And as for inspirations, the kind of weird thing about it is it was way the hell back in the day originally my take on Diablo 2. But it has evolved drastically from that point, because I started making games in terms of diceless live action, like role-playing or tabletop role-playing sort of games, because I wasn't allowed as much computer time as I wanted growing up. And so me and some friends would act out computer games. And then eventually we realized we could do a lot more acting them out than we could playing them. And it would let us kind of bring our own ideas to the games. And eventually I started making my own. So that's a summary of Enclave. It is genre agnostic. And a lot of what you get out of it depends on what you bring to it. Any other random questions for you guys before we sign off? Again, I'll do a poll on whether Magic the Gathering or some similar weird, different from the normal on this channel games would be interested. I have a bunch of notes for myself. The fact that Daniel mentioned that really incredible user patch mod is really fascinating. Maybe if I can find some more information, I can dive into that in future. I was taking a couple notes when he was talking about some things he worked on, like salvageable ruins. I just realized I forgot to put in my thoughts about that into my total overhaul framework. So that's something I'm going to have to do. I just realized I haven't really looked at the poll yet that I put out for that total overhaul video. I can tell you guys a little bit about how it's looking like we're going to do for the next episode. That could be kind of cool. Let me grab that. Obviously, anything could change because we have quite a lot. We have quite a lot of new stuff. Or rather, there could be new poll entries between now and then. It looks as though people are most interested in the next video being Civ design, but there's a couple other things that could totally win as of now. So if you have strong opinions on what you'd like to see next in Total Overhaul, make sure you cast a vote in that poll. Yeah, I'm thinking of writing a story based in the late 1400s. It was going to be kind of edgy. Yeah, you could easily do something like that. It is more inspired by Christianity as a whole, and now is the main focus. Yeah, you can absolutely do stuff like that. I think there's a lot of ways that you can do that very well. The big things that I would say is kind of like with game design. Think about kind of how to present the information in an accessible way, because sometimes I find that historical fiction comes in kind of two camps. One of which tells you fuck all and just kind of makes up a lot of details. It's more fiction than historical. And the other kind is so focused on history that it becomes kind of inaccessible to someone who doesn't know it. So if you can think of a way to present the information in a way that keeps it authentic, if that's your focus, but also lets people in on it more who might not know as much about it and maybe even teaches you something, I think that would be sick. It's interesting to see how something changes over the times. Yeah, there's no doubt. I think that's fascinating. And it's often a very good place to start a work of fiction is where, or like a work of art in general, is how does something change? But that's just what I think. So thank you guys so much for taking the time. It's been a pleasure. I hope you have enjoyed. And I will see you next month with another guest and other topics to discuss. And until then, my name is Robbie Howell. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch with me on this fine Sunday, and ciao for now.